Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammam Sangham Namasami. Okie dokie. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Mindful Samadhi, my YouTube channel. And as I promised earlier in the week, I said I would do another video. So here we are. What I actually want to talk about today is quite a fundamentally important thing the Buddha's laid out for us. So basically, there's a lot of formulas that the Buddha actually came up with and he's found for us. And one of them kind of blends in with all the other ones, and that is this one, which is the 3 marks of existence. So in Pali we call this Tilakkhaṇa. Now, understanding the 3 marks of existence is super important because I've done previous videos on things like the 4 Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, 4 Foundations of Mindfulness, 7 Factors of Enlightenment, all of these kind of things, the 5 aggregates, which I did just the other day, all of these things, right, they all correlate to the 3 marks of existence. So I thought it was a good idea I do a video today on the 3 marks of existence, because it will explain all the other previous videos that I've kind of gone into, okay? So basically, the 3 marks of existence are like fundamental characteristics of all conditioned phenomena in Buddhism, okay? So what I mean by that, like basically what I'll do first is I'm just going to explain and quickly clarify what I mean when I say the word conditioned in a Buddhist context, okay? Because we can loosely use the word conditioned in many different varying topics and subjects and conversations, but in a Buddhist context I kind of want to break it down so you guys understand, because I will probably be referring to the word conditioned once or twice at least in this video, okay? So conditioned things refers to anything that arises, exists, or changes in this world due to a specific set of causes and conditions, all right? And that in turn makes them all impermanent and interdependent. All right, so hopefully you guys understand that. So conditioned things are basically anything that arises in this world due to causes and conditions, which then in turn they make them impermanent and interdependent. All right, so hopefully you guys are going to remember that. So it's a certain set of conditions that makes things arise and come about, and therefore eventually fade away and cease to exist. So this, of course, will bring rise to things like unsatisfactoriness, which I'm also about to explain. Okay. Now, hopefully, that will give you some clarity to the term conditioned. Okay. So let's move on. Now, the 3 marks of existence that we're talking about, what this video is about, is Anicca, Dukkha, and Anatta. All right, so basically, Anicca is everything. I'll give you the English translation first. So Anicca is impermanence. So it's everything conditioned is in a constant change. So basically speaking, everything is impermanent. Everything is subject to change. Everything is transient. Everything is temporary. And nothing will last forever. Okay? That's the best way to sort of put that one. Dukkha, we can refer to, that's the Pali term, but we can refer to that in English as suffering. Or we could also use the word unsatisfactoriness. Okay? So all conditioned things are inherently unsatisfactory. And then the third one, a little bit more tricky, which is called Anatta, which is non-self, or we could refer to as not self. So that's the understanding that there is no permanent, unchanging self, or any essence in any phenomena whatsoever. Sorry, for some reason I've got the hiccups. So these marks apply primarily to conditioned things we call sankhara or sankharas, with anatta extending to all phenomena or dhammas, and also including the unconditioned being nibbana. Okay, so essentially understanding them at a deep level leads to insight, detachment, and finally liberation from suffering. Okay, so now hopefully we have a brief understanding of what the three marks of existence are. I'll just break them down for you again. We have, in the English term, we have impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. Or you could say impermanence, suffering, and not self. Okay, so they're the two variations. In Pali, we could just call them, we would simply refer to them as Anicca, Dukkha, and Anatta. Okay. All right. Now let me try and unpack each one so we can get a better understanding of each one in more detail. Okay. So the first one is impermanence, or in Pali, anicca. So this one is the first of the three marks of existence, and it's often considered the foundational insight that underpins the entire teachings of the Buddha. So it's super important. It's super valuable thing to understand. It refers to the universal characteristic of impermanence, the truth that all conditioned phenomena are transient, constantly changing, and are free from any permanent substance. All right. So the Pali phrase most central to this teaching is what we refer to as sabbe sankhara anicca, which means that all conditioned things or formations are therefore impermanent. Okay, so you'll find that this appears repeatedly in the Pali Canon, such in the Dhammapada it's mentioned, and also in the Anicca Sutta. So there's a sutta just based on this as well. We can even break down anicca into two categories, which then essentially operate on multiple levels, from the obvious to the profoundly subtle. Okay, so these are the gross impermanent and then the subtle impermanence. So I'll break them down for you. So the first one we have is gross impermanence. So this would be the most readily observable form. So the birth, the growth, the decay, and the death. So another way we can put this, or more commonly referred to is, in Buddhism, is birth, age, sickness, and death. So all living beings have obviously been subject to birth, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Now this, which in turn will inevitably lead to aging, and then sickness, and then eventually one day we will all die. Sounds a bit dramatic, but it is just a fact that we need to adhere to and try and understand, because everything is like this. If anything has been subject to birth, even be it a plant, a tree, an animal, a human, anything, it is subject to these four things. And that's something that we need to understand at a deep level, okay? It's a very important fundamental truth that we need to try and get our heads around, okay? So what we should try to understand, that all physical objects that arise will, in time, they will wear out, they'll disintegrate, and they'll cease to exist. Even the human body is prone to disintegrate as well. That even the bones, one day, if we leave it long enough, they will turn to powder. This is just a fact. It will disintegrate, and this is the same. It applies for everything. Okay, so even things like seasons changing and kingdoms and empires rising and falling over thousands of years or however long it may be, and so on and so forth. I think you get the general gist of what I'm trying to say when I speak about impermanence now. The Buddha often pointed to examples like the human body aging, or even a beautiful flower wilting. We see you know, say a rose, for example. I'm looking at one outside now. They're a beautiful thing once they start blooming and they start opening up, and you see these beautiful petals and this lovely color and shape and this beautiful perfumed aroma coming from the plant itself or the flower itself. But eventually this will wilt, rot and die. And this is what happens. Once we understand this, which in a minute I'll explain, we can actually do at a personal level when we do meditation practice. But once we can understand this with a generalization of a mindset, we can start to understand that this happens to everything, okay? So let me talk about the second kind of anicca now, which is the subtle impermanence, or the momentary impermanence, I like to call it. So at a deeper level, impermanence occurs in every moment, all conditioned phenomena that arises. So in Pali we call this upada. It persists for a brief time and then it will cease and fade away. This momentary flux, right, is the core of the Abhidhamma. Nothing remains identical, even for 2 consecutive moments. So everything is in a state of constant arising and passing away. That's just the nature of everything. And everything is subject to this from moment to moment. Now, in Vipassana or insight meditation, us practitioners can actually train to perceive this rapid change directly, leading to a very profound realization, all right? So you might be wondering why anicca, or, you know, why does anicca or impermanence actually matter then? Now, to put it simply, it's because in order to understand about this life being suffering and unsatisfactory, we need to understand anicca. So what is it? What is it that this connection to suffering and anatta have in common? So anicca, how can I explain it? So anicca, it's not just an abstract truth, it is the literal root cause of why our clinging will always lead to the path of suffering. So the best way I can explain that, because without the understanding of impermanence or without the understanding of anicca, what we tend to do is we cling and attach to these things because we don't want them to fade away and cease to exist. You know, if you buy something, it will eventually start aging, and perhaps in your lifetime, it could also cease to exist in some cases. Inevitably, in your lifetime or not, everything will cease to exist at some time or another. For example, the planet Earth is subject to change and is subject to cease to exist one day also. This won't happen in our lifetime, but it will happen. Now, when it comes to short-term things, we will cling and attach to pets, to animals, to family members, to friends, to relatives, to external formations and objects that we see. And what happens is, without the understanding of this constant changing, this transient nature of everything moving in a constant flux, we will cling and will attach, and then this will lead us straight to this road of suffering. And that is what happens from moment to moment in every waking person's life without this understanding of anicca. They will get to this road of suffering eventually because we're not understanding the anicca. So once you understand anicca, the suffering doesn't have to be like it is, okay? Because we understand the transient nature. We understand the changing. We understand the impermanence. Therefore, we don't cling and attach so much, and then therefore we don't have suffering as much, okay? So hopefully that makes a bit of sense, because all things are impermanent, and any attachment to them, be it people, possessions, experiences, even one's own body or mind for that matter, will inevitably result in dukkha or unsatisfactoriness. You know, another example of this is like the human body. Once we start aging, you know, we get to our 20s and 30s and everything's going well, you know, we have a good color of hair, you know, we haven't got any gray hairs, and we don't have any wrinkles on our skin, and you know, our skin is nice and tight, and everything is looking good, where we might be quite muscular, or we might have a good frame or a good shape or something, whatever it may be. But as aging occurs and starts to move in, what happens is things start to change. Because of anicca, hair starts to fall out, hair starts to discolor, it goes grey, it goes white, it starts fading, our skin starts going softer, it starts wrinkling. This is a natural process of the body aging. Now, these people that don't understand about anicca try their absolute best to prevent this from occurring. And in this world, or this specific world that we're living in, people start getting like surgery and Botox and plastic surgery and trying to find all these different avenues to prevent this aging from occurring. Now, the aging is inevitable. It's going to occur anyway. So clinging and to attaching it is only creating suffering. Because if you get Botox, or if you get plastic surgery, or if you get some nose job or whatever it may be done, this will also only last for a while, and aging will beat you to it every time, okay? So just understanding this one concept, anicca, is very, very important. Even emotions like pleasures will fade, loved ones will eventually die, and like I just mentioned, health, ultimately, it will decline, okay? So it's not something to feel grim about, but it's good to be aware and to understand that this is the nature of everything, okay? And what this does, impermanence or anicca, it actually opens the door and reveals itself for anatta, which is non-self. So if something were permanent, or if something had a permanent self, it would be unchanging and under our control, wouldn't it? Yes? But since everything changes uncontrollably, there's no enduring essence to call I or mine. You know what I mean? So the Buddha taught that failing to understand anicca is the primary cause of ignorance. Now, ignorance in Pali we call avidya, okay? Which in turn fuels tanha, which is craving. And this gives rise to the cycle of rebirth, which is essentially this wheel that we like to call in Buddhism samsara. And we're all trapped in this cycle of samsara until we can get ourselves out of it. That's me included. I'm still in samsara. Everyone is in samsara. So until we understand these fundamental truths at a deep level, we will continue this cycle of rebirth, okay? So I'll give you a quick reference. So I've written some things down that obviously I cannot remember. My mind is not that good. So what I've done is I've just given I'll give you a couple of analogies here. So in the Samyutta Nikaya, it's got the Anicca Sanya Sutta. Now the Buddha instructs monks to contemplate impermanence in the 5 aggregates. So form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness to overcome attachment. So if you're unaware of those, I did those in one of my videos. So you can actually check out the 5 aggregates. Actually, that was my last one, yes? Yeah, last video I did was the 5 aggregates. And then we've got in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is in 16 of the Digha Nikaya, the Buddha's final words include, all conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. This underscores anicca as a call to urgent practice. All right, and then lastly we have the Bhattacharata Sutta, which is from the Majjhima Nikaya, which emphasizes that living in the present moment, aware of impermanence without clinging to past or future. So the Buddha emphasizes this even in suttas, and all along he explains all these things throughout all of these Nikaya books, okay? So there are basically some findings of different areas of Buddhism, which I also give analogies, which also give analogies on impermanence, okay? So, even in different ones, like in Japanese Buddhism, they look at beautiful appearing cherry blossoms, so they're brief, beautiful blooming, and then all of a sudden they rapidly scatter all over the floor, once they've fallen from the tree. And then what this does is it represents this fleeting nature of life and beauty. So even in Japanese Buddhism, they even look at anicca in their own, I suppose you could say, analogies as well. So they're looking and referring to cherry blossoms, how they're just so beautiful, and they, you know, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a cherry blossom tree, but when they fill, they're just absolute abundance of flowers, blossoms. And then once the elements start getting to it, the heat and the wind and the air and the water and all this stuff, what happens is they eventually fall. And even as autumn and spring and seasons change, you'll find that they will shed all their blossoms on the floor and form this beautiful carpet. And it looks very lovely. But what happens is, if we observe this, we can see this nature. It also happens with the Bodhi tree, a very sacred tree in Buddhism, where Buddha got enlightened under. We have a Bodhi tree here at the monastery. And you find around November, you'll find that it sheds all of its leaves, and we're talking an absolute abundance of leaves. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these beautiful leaves, and they shed so quickly that it just forms this big carpet of Bodhi leaves all over the tree. And it's not until sort of late December that all the fresh leaves come back onto the tree. But the occurrence of this is quite rapid. And to observe this and just to watch how nature's playing out and watching it shed itself for a new body of leaves is actually a beautiful thing. So we can look at anicca as quite a lovely thing. It's quite a beautiful thing, because although we cling and attach to things and we don't want things to change, if we had it the other way around, I think we'd all be begging for change. So it's a very delicate topic for some people, but I think you'd find if we lived in a permanent world where everything was like deja vu, so to speak, I don't think it would be a very nice kind of atmosphere and a living environment, to be honest. So anyway, that's the Japanese example of it. And then even in like Tibetan culture, you know, they have Tibetans, they make sand mandalas. So they make these beautiful mandalas, and they make them out of sand. And you'll find the monks, you know, maybe 10, 15 monks, and they'll get together on the floor and they will do these beautiful sand mandalas with these absolutely lovely colors, and they're doing, you know, all these Buddha images and everything, like sort of a samsara kind of atmosphere, and they spend so much time delicately doing these sands, and then, you know, it's so painstakingly long to create, you know, these intricate coloured sand designs, and sometimes it takes days or even weeks to do it. But then once they finish it, they destroy them upon completion. And what this does for the Tibetan monks is it symbolises, again, impermanence of all phenomena. So all that time taking to do such a beautiful thing, and then they just destroy it. And that signifies to them impermanence. So it crosses through all three traditions of Buddhism. And, you know, it's a good thing to understand as Buddhist people. Trying to get the point across to lay people is obviously what I'm trying to do now, but if you put some understanding and knowledge to what I've just said and have a look at things around you, you will find that everything has a transient nature to it, okay? So another couple of other metaphors I can think of are like, I mean, I gave the Bodhi leaf kind of thing, but you know, you can also have when autumn comes around, all the leaves in majority of trees, they'll start falling, and then even the flowing of rivers as well. That's another good example. So they're both ever-changing, and they have no permanent qualities to them whatsoever. Okay, so a practical application we can use is meditating on anicca in our daily practice. So contemplating anicca is central to vipassana meditation, or as we refer to as insight meditation. So how we can do this is by observing the arising and passing of sensations within the body, feelings and things like this. Also the thoughts and the emotions, so the chitta. We can just observe these things and then have a look at the transient, changing nature of everything here as well. So not just externally, we can also sit down and do insight meditation or vipassana meditation, and we can also look internally and also see the transient nature working at an internal level as well. And how we can do this is basically when you sit, you're doing your practice and you're observing anicca, you can take a mental note on how these pleasant feelings change into perhaps unpleasant ones, to then maybe even neutral or even pleasant ones, you know, or vice versa. So we can also inherently look at these as well. This direct perception, it then eats away at our delusion that we have, leading to detachment, equanimity, and eventually liberation. That again being nibbana, which is unconditioned and therefore beyond impermanence. All right. So the Buddha said that one who perceives anicca fully will see dukkha and anatta, and for them, the uninclined, nibbana is near, which nibbana is the unconditioned. All right. So, in summary, what I've just mentioned, anicca is not like a pessimistic thing. It's actually a liberating truth. It's a liberating thing to understand for us humans. Okay. So by fully understanding and internalizing impermanence, one lets go of grasping and finds peace amid change and awakens to reality as it is. So that is anicca. I think I've explained that enough. 20 minutes on anicca? I think that's pretty good. So next we'll go into dukkha, sorry. Just give me a brief moment. All right, there's definitely enough on anatta, anicca, because I've almost lost my voice. I'm getting a raspy voice now just from talking to anicca, about anicca for too long. All right, so secondly, we have dukkha. This is the Pali reference to it. In English, we can refer to this basically as suffering or unsatisfactoriness, okay? Now, dukkha is the second mark of existence, and it's also the central concept in Theravada Buddhism. It's a tradition that adheres most closely to the early teachings that have been preserved in the Pali Canon. Okay, so it's almost famously known as the first noble truth, Dukkha Ariya Satya. Dukkha Ariya Satya, yeah. Now it's proclaimed by the Buddha in his first sermon. All right, so I will read that out for you as well, which is the Dhamma Chakkapavatana Sutta, right? So birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, illness is dukkha, death is dukkha, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are all dukkha. Association with the unbeloved is dukkha. Separation from the loved is dukkha. Not getting what one wants is dukkha. In brief, the five aggregates affected by clinging are dukkha. Dukkha is also one of the three marks of existence, Tilakkhaṇa, where it states sabbe sankhara dukkha. All conditioned things are dukkha. Okay? So very similar to anicca, all conditioned things are subject to anicca and also dukkha. Okay, so this is a very important thing to understand. Far from mere suffering, dukkha encompasses a broader spectrum of unsatisfactoriness, unreliability, and like an inherent instability to all conditioned existence. Okay, so in the Theravada tradition, it emphasizes its realistic acknowledgement as a starting point for the path for liberation and a call to profound insight as well. There are actually 3 types of dukkha in Theravada texts, particularly in the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, by the Buddhaghosa and the Abhidhamma commentary, which actually classifies dukkha into 3 categories to illustrate its regularity. Okay, so the first one being what we simply refer to as dukkha. Okay, so ordinary suffering or painful dukkha. Also, we have normal suffering, everyday suffering, and then we also have the painful side, so the more physical, I suppose you could say, side of the suffering. Okay, so this is the most obvious from its direct physical and mental pain. So it includes birth trauma, things like illness, injury, old age, death, grief, sorrow, things like lamenting as well, despair. These are the experiences everyone intuitively recognizes as suffering. Okay, all of us will recognize one of these, if not all of these, as suffering. Hopefully most of you recognize most of them as suffering. So number 2, the second kind of dukkha we have is called Vaparinama dukkha. Vaparinama dukkha. Yeah, that's the one, sorry. Vaparinama dukkha. Okay, which is the dukkha due to the change. Okay, so this is one we can refer to with Anicca, understanding the change. If we don't, then we're going to have this Vaparinama dukkha, which is the dukkha, the suffering we have, not understanding change. Okay, even pleasant experiences are dukkha because they're all impermanent. Everything is impermanent, good, bad, everything. Okay, so happiness arising from sensory pleasures, happiness arising from relationships or even achievements, inevitably fades, leading to dissatisfaction. All right. The joy of youth will inevitably turn to the pain of aging. Even the pleasure of eating leads to hunger and suffering again and again and again. All right. So clinging to transient happiness guarantees future unease when it actually changes or decides to change. And lastly, we have sankhara dukkha, which is the dukkha we inherit due to conditioned existence. Okay, so sankhara dukkha, okay, the dukkha or the suffering that we're going to inherit due to the conditioned existence. So hopefully you remember what I mean when I refer to as conditioned. This is one of the most subtle and profound, in my opinion. It's the inherent unsatisfactoriness of all conditioned phenomena, sankhara, okay? Because everything conditioned is impermanent and not self, anatta. It cannot provide any lasting security or fulfillment for us, okay? Even natural states or equanimity in mundane life, they're also unreliable foundations, okay? This is the dukkha of the 5 aggregates or the khandhas themselves when clung to as I, mine, or self. I went into detail and did a video on these 5 aggregates just the other day. So if you want to understand those more, there's a link highlighted in the description if you want to investigate those. I will be putting a link in the description so you guys can check that out, okay? So these 3 layers show us that dukkha permeates all levels of existence, not just the bad times. Dukkha is the first primary noble truth in the 4 noble truths, heavily representing that dukkha is diagnosed almost like a disease, okay? So we could diagnose this ourselves by utilizing the 4 noble truths as a formula, all right? So we could look at it as the first truth being dukkha exists, this of course being the symptom, okay? So the symptom is the suffering. The second truth is its origin is the craving, okay? So we have the suffering and then that is leading to the craving, which in Pali we call tanha, okay? And then the third truth is we knowing that it can cease. So we know that it can stop. We know that there's an unconditioned state, i.e. nibbana, okay? And then the fourth, what is the path to the cessation, which is the Noble Eightfold Path? So once again, I've also done a video on the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So I'll also incorporate those into links in this video description also for you all to check out, all right? So the Buddha actually had illustrated this with examples, right? He explained about being shot. There's like an arrow analogy, like a 2-arrow analogy. So I'll briefly try and explain that for you. So the Buddha explained about being shot by 2 arrows, okay? So like being shot with 1 arrow, we obviously have instant pain, don't we? So once you get the feeling of the first arrow penetrating in our body, that creates the pain. But then that versus 2 arrows, we now have pain plus the mental anguish from resistance, if that makes sense. So understanding dukkha fully requires seeing it as not as a random misfortune, so to speak, but as a structural feature of samsara. So it's giving us some structure and understanding to this wheel of samsara, this cycle of samsara, okay? So there's an inherent connection to anicca and anatta in the Theravada tradition, whereas dukkha is inseparable from the other marks, because anicca, impermanence, causes dukkha, because change erodes what we cling to, okay? That's what happens there. So anatta reveals what clinging is, which is futile. There is no permanent controller or essence to secure the so-called happiness, is there? So is it deep insight or vipassana into dukkha that arises from contemplating these interconnections, often through meditation on the 5 aggregates, or even our body sensations by utilizing things like the 4 foundations of mindfulness, contemplation of body, feelings, mind and mind objects or mental objects. So we can do these contemplations through our practice, okay? So Theravada traditions, like those in places like Burma, like Myanmar, Thailand, and Sri Lanka, they emphasize that it's by doing vipassana meditation that we can directly experience this suffering or dukkha head on, okay? So we can understand it in a theoretical standpoint, but when it comes to understanding it at a practical standpoint, this is where we need to do the vipassana, the insight meditation, and that gives us a proper formal understanding of what we're talking about. So, you know, practitioners can actually observe the arising and passing phenomena. You know, for example, the pain in the sitting posture, for example, if you don't react to it and you just note it, label its unsatisfactory nature, this leads to detachment and the stages of insight, or even we call this vipassana jnana, culminating in the realization of nibbana, which is the unconditioned state, and it's free from all suffering, it's free from all dukkha. And this is what the Buddha actually aimed to achieve, and what he actually achieved was a very unconditioned state where there was no suffering anymore, because he knew how to get himself out of this. And this is what he elaborates and teaches us, and what I'm trying to explain to you guys now, okay? So basically it's more modern teachers, right, like S.N. Goenka and Mahasi Sayadaw, that stress that contemplating dukkha is essential for breaking the illusion of permanence and self, okay? So these practices essentially teach us about anicca and anatta at a deep level by investigating dukkha, all right? So in essence, dukkha in Theravada is not a doctrine of despair, but a profound truth that it motivates ethical living. So sila, concentration, and wisdom. So we call this sila, samadhi, and panya. And so also fully penetrating it is what actually leads us to the freedom. So as long as we can understand that whatever arises passes away, then there is no real suffering for one who sees this clearly, okay? There won't be any suffering. As long as we can see and observe this with a clear mind and a clear understanding with panya, with wisdom, then there will be no suffering. Okay, so lastly we have in Pali what we refer to as Anatta. Now this in plain English we can just refer to as non-self or not self, all right? So Anatta is the most distinctive and profound teachings of the Buddha, setting apart from all other contemporary Indian traditions where they talk about things like, like an eternal soul they call Atta or Atman in some traditions, depending on what region of India you're from. The core statement in the Pali Canon we actually call Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. So all phenomena are not self. Okay, so Buddha actually emphasizes the opposite, and we say there is no self. Okay, so Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, all phenomena are not self. So this is the more broader scope, right? While Anicca and Dukkha apply to conditioned things, sankhara, Anatta applies to all the Dhamma phenomena, including the unconditioned nibbana. So Anatta essentially asserts that there is no permanent, unchanging, independent essence or self in any phenomena whatsoever, neither in persons nor external objects for that matter. So what we perceive as a self is merely a conventional label applied to a constantly changing process. All right? Let me say that again. So what we perceive as self, me, I, mine, is merely a conventional label applied to a constantly changing process. All right? So what the Theravada tradition does is it analyzes our personal existence into the 5 aggregates of clinging, and we call this Pancha Upadana Kanda. And I actually did a video in this, I think last week. Yeah, last week I did a video in this. So you can check that out. Video will be in link, as I've already mentioned. And that is basically showing us that none of them, individually or collectively, constitutes a self. None of them. Okay? So, yeah, again, I'll leave a link in the 5 aggregates in the description. So you can check that out. But again, I'll quickly run through it because I think we need to understand them. So, firstly, we've got rupa, so form or matter. This is the physical body and the sensory organs. The second, we have vedana, which is feelings. So we have pleasant, we have unpleasant feelings, and then we have neutral feelings. And then we have sanya, which is perception, recognition and labeling of experiences. And sankhara, which is mental formations, which is things like volitions, intentions, habits, and other mental activities. And then lastly, we have consciousness, which we call vijnana, which is awareness dependent on the sense bases. So the awareness being these 6 sense doors that we have, we call these consciousness. So eye consciousness, ear consciousness, all these things we call consciousness because they actually perceive a consciousness. Without them, there would be no consciousness. You would have to have a look into the video I did just the other day, and you'll have a better understanding, you'll be able to grasp a better understanding of what I'm explaining about. Okay, so again, we're just talking about 3 marks of existence today, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with those ones. Okay, so these aggregates that I've just mentioned, they're impermanent, so they're anicca, they're unsatisfactory, suffering or dukkha, and so clinging to any of these as I or mine or myself will ultimately lead to suffering. So the Buddha actually deconstructs these in the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, which was the Buddha's second discourse, which he delivered to the 5 ascetics, right? So for each aggregate, the Buddha asked, is it permanent or impermanent? Now their response was impermanent. Then the Buddha asked, what is impermanent? Dukkha? That was the question. Then they replied, yes. And then finally the Buddha then said, is it fitting to regard what is impermanent and dukkha's as this is mine, this is I, this is myself? The 5 ascetics all replied no. So what this actually did is it led to these 5 ascetics attaining arahantship, all becoming the first fully enlightened disciples. So it's a very interesting read, but let's ask the all-important question of why anatta actually matters. Countering the illusion of self, the actual belief in a self, sakkaya ditthi, is the root of craving, conceit, and also wrong view. It manifests as "this is mine," which then results in greed and attachment. So "this is I," which then brings rise to conceit and identity. And then lastly, "this is myself," which creates a belief system of eternalism and annihilationism. So it's realizing of anatta that essentially eradicates this delusion, uprooting ignorance, avidya, and ending up in the cycle of samsara. Okay, I hope you're following me. In Theravada Buddhism, we emphasize that anatta is not actually a nihilistic or nihilistic denial of experience, but it's more of a middle way or a middle path. There is no unchanging self, yet conventional personalhood and responsibility does exist. So karma operates through the aggregates. I think I've actually got a little note on that one as well. So Tilakkhaṇa Sutta, which is in the Samyutta Nikaya, verse 2259, I think it is, direct refutation of self in the aggregates. The Dhammapada, verses 277 to 279, the 3 marks culminating in anatta. The Visuddhimagga, path of purification, by Buddhaghosa, details analysis showing anatta through characteristics like impersonality, uncontrollability, and emptiness of core. And then the Abhidhamma Pitaka breaks phenomena into ultimate realities. So Paramattha Dhamma, Chitta, Cetasika, mental factors, Rupa, matter, Nibbana, none of which possess a self. Okay, so practical realization through vipassana in Theravada's practice and the intellectual understanding of anatta is actually insufficient. Okay, so we must understand that for true wisdom on the 3 markings of existence, direct insight or vipassana meditation is actually essential. Like I mentioned earlier, we can look at as much theory as we want, but we actually need to go and do the practice and apply this physical component of actually doing the insight meditation, which will reveal the 3 marks of existence. It will reveal anicca, dukkha, and anatta at a deep level. The theoretical side will only get us so far. It will give us an understanding, I'm not saying it won't, but once you apply the direct aspect of it, so for example, doing the meditation, that will bring rise to this understanding at a true deep level. And this will also bring rise to pañña, the wisdom faculty, okay? So meditators can then contemplate the aggregates arising and passing in real time, noting their impersonal nature. So it's vital that we do the meditation, because this will bring rise to the understanding of this is not mine, this is not me, and this is not myself. That is what the meditation does. That is what the insight meditation does when we apply it in our day-to-day practice. So this progresses us through the 16 stages of insight knowledge. And we call this vipassana jnana. It's where deeper realizations of anatta dissolves the sense of a doer or experiencer. Okay, so what this does, if with enough practice and virya or energy, this will, and obviously understanding of the Dhamma, this will lead to stream entry or even potential higher paths in your practice. So, there's modern practitioner teachers in Theravada Buddhism, like, for example, Mahasi Sayadaw, and even Ajahn Chah from the Thai tradition, that actually stress that full realization of anatta brings absolute complete freedom. No more identification with pain, no more identification with pleasure, no more identification with thoughts or even the body, so anatta. So to summarize what I've mentioned, anatta in Theravada is the liberating insight that penetrates the illusion of a permanent self, revealing reality as a blend of impersonal processes, I think is the best way to put it. So it is the key to end suffering, attained through ethical conduct, concentration, and penetrative wisdom, all right? So as the Buddha said, the Buddha actually quoted, as one sees anatta, one sees Dhamma. One who sees Dhamma sees anatta. Okay? So it's a very important thing to understand and to do your research and have a look into it. So if you want to learn more on the 3 marks of existence, I think I've covered it pretty well, but if you did want to learn more of it, there's the Anicca Sanya Sutta you can have a look at. Mahaparinibbana Sutta goes into it. Dhamma Chakkappavatana Sutta goes into it as well. The Visuddhimagga also has it throughout it. The Tilakkhaṇa Sutta, it's also in different verses in the Dhammapada as well. And then obviously in the Abhidhamma Pitaka. So there's a lot of different areas where you can find information on the 3 marks of existence, okay? That's all I'm going to talk about today. I think we're close to 1 hour of me talking about the 3 marks of existence. So I don't think I can go any more extensively into those 3 topics. Actually, I probably could, but I'm not going to. I don't want to bore you guys too much. I try and keep these to about 30-minute mark, but this one I really wanted to try and detail for you guys as much as possible, because this correlates to so many other parts of what the Buddhist taught, you know. So it also goes into the 4 Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and all of these things, the aggregates. It goes into 7 factors of enlightenment. Everything, Anicca, Dukkha, and Anatta, has a lot of validity to when it comes to learning and understanding these different kinds of practices that we can apply in our meditation, okay? So I hope this was an informative video for you guys, not too complex, and you guys could kind of understand what I was talking about. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to flick me an email. My email address will be in the description also. And I'll also leave a link of those 3 videos that I've mentioned. The 4 Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the 5 aggregates of clinging. I'll also leave those links in the description, and you can check those out. They're on my YouTube channel, but for easy reference, I'll leave the links, hyperlinks there in the description, okay? And again, any questions, please feel free to shout out. Send me an email, and I'll adhere to getting back to you as soon as possible. Okay, so that's all for this afternoon. I hope you all have a blessed weekend ahead of you, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you for listening. Te Rawan Saranai. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.